You a couple of lighthearted things. This came from a preacher in Ohio. He said, "Sometimes I wake up grumpy, but other times I let her sleep in." They're still married, by the way. He's the preacher in East Liverpool, Ohio. Do not give Rice Krispies to young children. I ate them when I was a kid. Now when I stand up, I snap, crackle, and pop. I do like this perspective. My wrinkles show I laughed. My gray hair shows I cared. My scars show I lived. And my belly shows I really like snacks. You may lose many things in your life. Don't lose your sense of humor. Your sense of humor can be very, very helpful when we're dealing with stress, and especially the stress and the heaviness of the weight of the burden of loss. Don't lose your sense of humor. Well, hey, thank you very much for the interaction in that previous class, and I hope that this session is of some benefit to you. What does grief do to us? What does it do to us? Well, I think this is a good depiction. It blows up our life. That's what it does. It forever changes our life. Grief has a powerful impact. What we continue to promote in regard to promoting awareness about the Widowhood Workshop Ministry, which is a grief ministry, is here's the way we put it. The ministry is for the purpose of educating people about the powerful impact of loss and encouraging people who are dealing with it. It does have a powerful impact. So, let's talk a little bit about this, and for some reason it's not going forward. Is there a battery issue? Is there... The computer is not cooperating. There we go. Okay, thank you. Here is your mathematical equation you're living with. We're born into this world and we experience life. It's a broken world. But even though it's broken, we still are always more blessed than we're burdened. Sometimes we don't realize it because of the powerful impact of the troubles that we deal with in life, which are virtually all different kinds of loss. And in this life, we become very attached to things and to people. And if we lose those things or people that we become very attached to, then we are going to feel grief. We're going to struggle with grief. Now, what does it do to us? Number one, it confuses our thinker. Let me suggest to you that all of us have a feeler and a thinker. Now, you're not going to find that in an anatomy and physiology book in high school or college. That kind of wording. But everybody has a thinker and a feeler. And whenever we suffer the loss of something of value to us, it does confuse our thinker. The Cleveland Clinic has a great website, and in that website, in regard to confusion, they make this observation. Confusion is a symptom that happens because of brain activity disruptions. Now, what's going to cause your brain to have disruption more than the suffering of great loss? Any condition, circumstance, or event that disrupts your brain function can cause confusion. Well, that's exactly what grief does. It causes your thinker to become confused. We're going to deal with this now in a more detailed way. I want to share with you a book that was introduced to me by a widow lady in Southern California, in Apple Valley, California. When Cheryl Wayne and I were out there, I met her. I was very impressed with her, so much so that before I put the third book I wrote to print, I sent her the manuscript. And I said, "Would you please read the manuscript and give me some feedback?" She gave me some feedback. This was the best feedback. She said, "Dean, this book just came out." And she said, "I highly recommend that you get this book and you read it. There might be some things in this book called The Grieving Brain that you could incorporate into what you've written here in this book after the end comes. Now, I'm going to read to you a section on page 5, some of which is on the screen. Even when a person has been ill for a very long time, no one knows what it will be like to walk through the world without this other person. My contribution as a scientist, she is a neuroscientist. Now, in addition to being a neuroscientist, she is also a psychologist, a therapist. She has spent decades in her life studying, both from a psychologist standpoint and a neuroscientist standpoint, the effect of grief on the brain, not on the emotions, on the brain. She says, my contribution as a scientist has been to study grief from the brain's perspective, from the perspective that the brain is trying to solve a problem when faced with the absence of what could be the most important person in our life. Grief is a heart-wrenchingly painful problem for the brain to solve. And grieving necessitates learning to live in the world with the absence of someone you deeply love, who is ingrained in your understanding of the world. This means that for your brain, your loved one is simultaneously gone and also everlasting, and you are walking through two worlds at the same time. You are navigating your life despite the fact that they have been stolen from you, a premise that makes no sense, that is both confusing and upsetting to your brain. I remember a brother in Christ, a preacher, if I were to say his name, many of you would know him, where he basically suggested on a Facebook post that grief was an emotional experience, and he depicted it that way almost as if it were merely or solely an emotional experience. It is a mental challenge as much or more than it is an emotional challenge. I did not realize that until my wife passed away, and I immersed myself in everything I could get my hands on about the subject of grief. And I am so appreciative of that sister over in Southern California who recommended this book, because it has been very insightful. Here is a story that she tells when she's doing grief therapy. First session. She said, imagine you going to bed one night and you go into a deep sleep. I mean, you've really worn yourself out, and we can go into a really, really deep sleep. And she said, while you're sound asleep, burglars break into your house and they steal your dining room table. Now stay with me here, okay? Why would anybody take a dining room table? Just don't be concerned about that part. They run off with your dining room table and they get out scot-free. Now, after that, sometime after they've left, you wake up, you're tossing and turning, you wake up and you feel this sense of thirst, and you decide, I need to go get me something to drink. So you get up and you go and walk to the faucet to get the drink that you need and where you typically get that drink. But in doing that, you pass through the dining room and it's dark because you don't need light. This is your house. And right where your hip should hit the side, the corner of that dining room table, it doesn't. And immediately your brain understands something's not right here. She's in this room where this dining room table, your brain has gotten used to the dining room table being right there in that room. Now, she said your brain operates kind of like these games, these virtual games, these virtual maps in these games that are, these tech games that are played. She said your brain operates much like that. And so what your brain is disturbed by is change. When your brain has gotten used to something being somewhere and it's no longer there, and your brain is alerted to the fact it's not there, that disturbs your brain. And because your brain's always looking for answers, right? Where are my keys? You know, who is this? We're always wanting to understand. We're always wanting answers. And so your brain is really struggling. So this is not just an emotional experience. This is a mental challenge as well. And so your brain's going to have to get used to and recover from and readjust to the loss. And the closer you are attached to the thing or the person, the more difficult it is for your brain to adjust. Now, she doesn't use this analogy. This is my analogy. I'm a big sports fan, especially football. And we have what's called now, we're very concerned about head injuries, and we have discussion protocol. So when there is the possibility of a head injury, we have things that we do that we examine these people, and they may have concussion symptoms. And we understand the fact that they now have a brain injury. And so we need to treat them as if they have this brain injury. We need to treat them differently because they are different now. Until they recover, they're very different. So we need to be careful. Think of the impact of grief the same way. Now again, she doesn't use this analogy, but I do. The loss and the effect of the loss is kind of like a concussion in that your brain is injured and it's struggling with this issue of the absence of something or somebody. Now, imagine the effect, the difference in the imagine of the effect of something no longer being in its place and then somebody no longer being in your space. Imagine how confusing that is to your brain. So in other words, we've got to give ourselves time to, just like with a concussion, you've got to give yourself time to recover and be patient with yourself. And we also, recognizing this is why we need to be patient with other people who are struggling. Later today, I'm going to be on the phone with an adult daughter of a mother, and this couple had been married for 61 years. They'd known one another since they were, I think, 5th grade. He recently died a few weeks ago. The adult daughter is having a real struggle in her mother not being right. She's just not right. Well, she can't be right because she's grieving. And somebody has been in her life for decades, for well over half of a century. But the daughter's wanting to draw her in to this situation where she's normal again. Well, she's not going to be normal again. She's going to be a different person. And we need to be patient with that person. And for a while, we just need to do what the book says. I don't know if some of you have seen this Facebook feed. I'm presently in, I think, the 6th chapter of this book, Let Them. It's the let them theory. And sometimes in life, in our relationships, what we need to do is we need to gain our freedom by letting them feel the way they do about us, letting them do whatever it is they want to do. We need to not permit ourselves to be controlled by what other people think and other people do. That's basically the theory of this book, the let them theory it's called. I think Mel, M-E-L, Robinson, R-O-B-I-N-S-O-N, I think. Well, anyway, starts with an R. And what we need to do when we're dealing with people who are grieving that we love, we need to understand that during this transitional time, this neutral zone, we just need to let them. You know, we shouldn't feel bad about them crying, for instance. If they can't stop crying, we shouldn't be concerned about that. That's very natural and very normal. And maybe they're excessively quiet, way more quiet than they used to be. We just need to let them. We just need to let them grieve in whatever way it works for them so that they can get to a better place in their life. But see, that's very hard for us because we want things to be better quickly, don't we? We love them, and so we want things to just be better And we can't control that. We need to permit that. Now, this is what really throws us for a loop here. Not only does grief confuse our thinker, it messes with our feeler. Now, we're a basket case. Now, we are the people who are the subject of concern of people who really love us. I don't know how many people have come to me and said, you know, Dean, at one time during this journey, I thought I was going crazy. That is a very common conclusion about yourself when you're going through really serious grief in your life. You really begin to wonder about yourself. You have a lot of self-doubt. It does really mess with our feeler. It is a very emotional experience. The best book I have ever read about loss is this one. Now, it's written, let me explain about this book, Getting to the Other Side of Grief. I love that title, by the way. It is possible. You can do that. By the grace of God, you can get to the other side of grief. That doesn't mean that you're still not going to be scarred the rest of your life. But you can get to the other side of grief. This book is written by a male and a female, both of whom have lost their mates. One has a pastoral counseling background. The other has a nursing background. And I love how you read her comments, you read his comments. It's a very, very insightful book. Written not only for people who have lost their spouse or for people who might be losing their spouse in the future, but it's also a good book about grief generally. In that book, he makes this observation. Actually, research shows that generally it takes an average of 6 to 9 months for one's brain cognitively and heart emotionally to connect and accept that the person has died and cannot come back. Are you kidding me? That long? That's not uncommon. What it's pointing out is this is a process. Grief is a process, and it's a very slow process, one that probably all of us would like to hurry along much, much faster than we actually experience. James Dobson, who passed away, in one of his books, he said, we must understand that emotions are unreliable and at times tyrannical. And never is that more obvious than in deep grief. You know, we talk about Jesus being Lord, and that really does need to be what we strive for our entire life, that Jesus be our Lord. There are times, though, in our life, and I'm glad that God understands this and He is patient with us, that because of things that we experience in life, other things become our Lord. I think there are times that when we've suffered great grief, grief is our Lord. It's that dominating. It's so confused our thinker, and it has so seriously messed with our feeler that it really is dominating us. And I think that's part of the reason why some people, after great loss, part of the effect is they end up drifting away from the church. Hopefully just for a while, but they're just such a mess. They're just not the person they used to be. They do and say and think things that are uncharacteristic and inconsistent with their history. Well, I'm glad God knew how we're made. He knows our frame, and He knows that we have this mental, rational aspect, and we also have this emotional part to us. And the circumstances around us are what causes the mess inside of us when those things are negative. You know, when we have good things happen, and when we're experiencing good things, it has an effect on us inwardly. It really lifts our spirit. But when those things around us are the bad things, like loss, for instance, that has an effect on us, a powerful effect on us. And we need to accept that fact and realize that fact. Too often, when it comes to the bad things, and when we're experiencing grief, we would like to portray ourselves as better than we actually are. because we don't want people to think that we're weak. Well, who's not weak? Weakness is inbred in the human condition in a broken world. That's why we need the Lord. And I think that's one of the reasons why God permits us to experience the sufferings that we do. There's value in the suffering because of the struggle it forces us to have in our life to maybe get to a better place in our life. The reality is there are times that we are in intensive care phase of our life. Have any of you ever been in intensive care as a patient? I'm curious. Oh, okay, a couple. Why did they put you in intensive care? Were you too good to be in a regular room? I mean, with all the rest of the people? No, I was too close to death. You were too close to death. Okay. People get in intensive care because they need help. More help than the people in the regular room. By the way, if you visit people in the hospital, here's something I'd suggest you do once in a while. I would often do this when I was a local preacher. I spent a lot of time in hospitals. And sometimes I would interact with the nurses. I just love to talk to them about, what's going on in their life and about their job. And so I will ask, what is the patient-nurse ratio in this section of the hospital? Now, if you ask that question, you better brace yourself because the answer might disturb you because that's one reason why nurses are under so much stress. The nurse-patient ratio can be very challenging for the nurses. Well, what's the difference in the nurse-patient ratio in an intensive care unit? Yeah, it can be one-on-one. You can't get away with nothing, can you? They have got you hooked up, and they know when you breathe. They know when your heart beats. They know when you try to move, and they also know when you're not moving. You need intensive care. You need special care. There are times in your life because of what you've experienced. We need to admit the fact, okay, I need more than a regular room. I need intensive care. And there's no telling how long you'll be there. I know a lady who her husband was in intensive care for 8 weeks before he died. By the way, imagine that hospital bill. But there are times that we just have to realize that we need special care. This whole idea of, and I hope I have time to talk more about it tomorrow, this whole idea about, I got this, I hate that. I hate that when people say that. We'll talk about that tomorrow. People in the hospital who are in intensive care, they don't got this. They need help. They need a lot of help because they can't handle this alone. We need to realize that when it comes to our grief. Now, Cheryl Wayne, you can prep yourself. Another thing that grief does to us is it prompts us to ask the question why. It's a very natural and normal reaction. Now, in my case, one of the things that I have wondered about my wife, well, why was my wife diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at about age 52? Why couldn't it have been 62 instead of 52? And when she died, why Christmas Day? I mean, come on. Lord, couldn't it have been a week earlier? Or maybe after New Year's Day? Why Christmas Day? Have you ever wondered about some things in your life? What it was and when it happened and why it happened? It's a very common and natural thing. Now, it's also not sinful. Okay, go ahead, Cheryl Wayne. Cheryl Wayne's going to come to the microphone back here behind me, and he is going to read Job chapter 3, read verse 11, 12, and 20. 11, 12, and 20.
Strokes make the arms not work real good. Dean, I'm not getting there.
Okay, I'll get it. You get the next one.
Okay, I'll get the next one.
Okay.
Because my hands are not working.
Okay, we talked about Job and all the things that he went through. Now, can you imagine him getting to the point where he would say things like this? This is Job chapter 3, verse 11, and then verse 12 as well. Now, again, keep in mind what he has gone through. Boy, what is it about Arnold, Missouri? I had the same problem, Cheryl Wayne, that you did, turning to the wrong section. Finally, he's had a terrible experience with a number of losses. Why did I not die at birth? Why did I not come from the birth and expire? Why did the knees receive me? Or why the breasts that I should nurse? What's he wanting to do? Verse 20, why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter in soul? How's he feeling? What effect is this having on him? What would he have rather done if he had his choice? Instead of continue to suffer, he'd rather die. You know, that could be, suicidal thoughts are not uncommon with people who are struggling with great grief. And that's one reason why we need to be really careful in dealing with those people. Do you have the Psalm passage? 74? Okay. Listen to this one.
I'll be reading from the New English Standard Version. "O God, why do you cast us off forever? Why does your anger smoke against the sheep of your pasture?" The 11th verse. "Why do you hold back your hand from your right hand? Take it from the fold of your garment and destroy them."
This is my favorite one, Gideon. In Judges chapter 6, Israel is suffering greatly. They have experienced the loss of their normal, their prosperity, and they are struggling big time. And in Judges chapter 6, notice what he says here. If the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? What does that say about Gideon's perspective about if God is with us? If God is with us, how should things be? They should be good, shouldn't they? If the Lord is with you, they should be good. He says, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Well, in Judges chapter 6, earlier, previous to verse 13, there's a description there of all the struggling that they're really struggling with a lot of loss and really difficult times. And he's saying, why? Why? And this is a man of God, handpicked by God, to be a judge or deliverer for Israel. And he's asking why. W.T. Hamilton was the son-in-law of Gus Nichols. Gus Nichols was a famous Alabama preacher of a bygone era. W.T. Hamilton wrote a book with this particular question as the title of the book: why has all this happened to us? In the writing of that book, W.T. Hamilton, and it's a great book, W.T. Hamilton is writing this book, and right in the middle of the book, I think it's chapter 5 or 6, every chapter was previously designed. And then when you get to this chapter, right in the middle of the book, he begins the chapter by saying this chapter was not in the original design of the book. I've just been diagnosed with bone cancer. He barely got the book done before he died. Don't you have to wonder why it is people suffer? And why good people as well as bad people suffer? Do you have the Jeremiah passage? Yes. Jeremiah was one of the most persecuted prophets of all of them. And notice here, even though a man of faith, what he asks.
"Why did I come out from the womb to see toil and sorrow and spend my days in shame?"
Why? Now Jesus on the cross, what's his why question? Somebody quote it. It's very familiar. Why have you forsaken me? Have you ever wondered why that verse is in the Bible? I don't know. I have wondered why, though. And here's one thing I got to thinking about in recent years. Could one of the purposes of that verse be, again, another revelation of the humanity of Jesus? Why has all this happened to us? That's Gideon. Jesus on the cross, why have you forsaken me? Now, Jesus is sinless. He asked the question, why? So is it sinful to ask the question, why? No, it's not. However, I think we need to realize that that is not the million-dollar question when you're suffering and when you're grieving. Why is not the million-dollar question? I'll tell you what it is. It's who. Who knows about what's going on in your life better than anybody else? Who knows what's going on inside of you because of what's going on around you better than anybody else? Who knows every single need you have better than anybody else? Who can provide for every single thing that you need in your life as long as you live better than anybody else? How many of those who questions can you answer? Every single one of them. Because what's the answer? God. When we reduce life to its essentials, only one thing is necessary: to have God. Edwin White, the book, A Sense of Presence. One of the greatest feats of life is to learn to live without answers. There will be things in this life that we experience that cause us to wonder why, and we will never be given the answer this side of eternity. Old brother Charles Hodge, he used to brag that he was the preacher in Big D, and he said, "I don't mean Dallas, I mean Duncanville." Well, Charles Hodge had some classic phrases he would use, and one of the statements he would often make is he would say, "Familiar scriptures ought to be read more carefully." And I think grief prompts people to read scriptures more carefully than before. Boy, I know that's been the case with me. I see some things now, when I read scripture, I see some things and think of some things that I've never thought about before. But another thing Charles Hodge said in the back of the Gospel Advocate one year, on one particular month, he said, "Faith does not give us the answers. Faith gives us the ability to live without answers." There's your solution to the struggle of living without the answers. It's faith. Having faith that God is with us and will help us through this. Grief has a really, really powerful impact in our life. And it's not just mental, it's not just emotional, but there's also a psychological aspect, a social aspect, a physical aspect. It can have a spiritual effect. Faith has a really powerful impact in our lives. Andrew was 7 years old when he got sick. His mom and dad live in Pikeville, Kentucky. His father's the preacher at the Main Street Church of Christ in Pikeville, Kentucky. And in my Bible, I carry a card that has Andrew's picture on it. It's the card from the memorial service. October 2022, he died. Why does a 7-year-old kid die? And they're not even sure why. And it's a preacher's kid. I thought if you lived a good life, you'd have good things happen, because you reap what you sow, right? See how confusing all this can be? Do you know what his mother does to this day? Every night she goes into his room and she reads to him. That's her way of coping with the loss of Andrew. It can have a powerful impact. Dennis and his wife lost their 28-year-old son. Dennis is an elder in the church in Olathe, Kansas. And his son was in Trenton, Tennessee in an awful automobile accident. And his son, their son, Bradford, passed away as a result of the injuries from that accident. He'd only been married a little over 1,300 days. I know that because his wife, Brittany, wrote a blog about her grief journey after she lost her husband. Dennis told me about one particular occasion where he kind of blew up at his wife. And he said something like this to her: "I lost a son too." See, there was a struggle there in their marriage, their relationship, because they had lost a precious blessing in their life. And it has taken years to adjust to that loss. Far left to right. Imagine coming in, putting your purse and your keys on the washer and dryer, and walking down the hallway, and then finding your husband in a pool of blood and the gun next to him. Imagine, next person, being 34 years old, awakened one morning by your husband, who's 36 years old, having a heart attack. And she pulls him off the bed, she administers CPR, calls 911, has him taken to the hospital, and he dies. She's 34 years old. They had a child at the time that was about 5 years old. Are 34-year-old women supposed to be widowed? Why? You're meeting Cheryl Wayne today, and the next lady there next to Cheryl Wayne in that picture, the 20th anniversary of her husband's passing was November 10th. She lost her husband in her early 40s. The fellow in the middle of that group there had been married for over 30 years to Sharon, and she passed away. And the next person in that group there, who also lost a spouse, he was in his 60s and she was in her late 50s. And then there's me. There's faces to put with the powerful impact of loss. But every single one of those people that you see in those two slides learn to survive, learn to cope, and have grown, but are still scarred, and always will be, by the losses that have been experienced. What does grief do to us? Well, the last thing I want to mention to you is it challenges us, and that's the good part. There are times in life we need to be challenged. We don't need life to be easy. We need to be challenged. And grief is definitely challenging. There was a guy named Eric Lindemann, who's a psychiatrist back in the 1940s, that coined the words grief work. Theresa Rando, a PhD, wrote a book, How to Go On Living When Someone You Love Dies, and in that book, here's her observation. As a griever, we need to appreciate the fact that grief is work. It requires the expenditure of both physical and emotional energy. It is no less of a task than the digging of a ditch or any other physical labor. It is going to challenge us when we suffer loss. Tribulations of all sorts, and I think pretty much all tribulations are some form, some kind of loss. They are going to challenge us, but they can produce perseverance, character, and hope. There's the positive. And when we're dealing with negatives, we need to really make sure that we focus on positives while dealing with the reality of the negatives. Romans chapter 5, Paul's been talking about justification by faith. But he says in verse 3, and not only that, but we glory in tribulations. Now, if I were writing that, I would say we grieve in tribulations. And we do. And Paul knows that. He has grieved in his tribulations, But here he's talking about we don't only grieve, we can glory. One of the blessings of being a Christian is we can glory in our tribulations. Knowing that, here's how. Here's why we can do that. Knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, endurance, strength, the ability to sustain ourselves. Perseverance, character, and character hope. Now, hope does not disappoint because of the love of God which has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit who was given to us. So there's a value in the pain and the suffering, in the struggle. And there's a value in it that possibly could never be gained by prosperity, but can be a blessing that comes from adversity. The bottom line is, you can choose, and it is a choice, you can choose to use your burdens and turn them into blessings. By the grace of God, we all have that power. What you're doing, consistent with the passage in Romans 5, you're taking that tribulation, that loss that you've experienced and the grief, the powerful impact, and you're using it to grow. See, that's a blessing. You've turned the burden into a blessing because now that has become a tool that you're using to become a stronger, better, wiser person. Another thing that you can do is you can take that burden and you can turn it in to an experience that helps you to help other people better than you ever could before. Do you know what gives you credibility with a cancer patient? Having been a cancer patient. Do you know what gives you credibility with somebody who has lost their child to the world? Another parent who's gone through that same agony. You know what gives credibility to a widow or a widower to help another widow or widower? The experience of the loss. I don't know how many of you saw Spider-Man, the first movie, but the uncle says to the boy, as he unknowingly is transforming, morphing into Spider-Man, in a timely time in the movie, the uncle says to the boy, with great power comes great responsibility. With great loss comes great power. The power of influence. Your story is inspirational. If you learn to survive, you learn to cope, and you have grown through the experience, what you've done is you've taken that burden, you've turned it into a blessing, and now you're taking that blessing to bless other people. So see, the choice that we can make in our grief journey down the road, not early on, but down the road, is we can take that awful thing that Satan has afflicted us with. Where do you think your troubles and trials come from? Who do you think is trying to drive you away from God, cause you to lose your faith, no longer want to come and worship the Lord? Who do you think's messing in your life? Satan is after all of us. We're fresh meat for the devil. And one way that he causes us to really question ourselves and God and our church family is the troubles that we deal with in our life. Who was messing with Job's life? It wasn't God, it was Satan. God said, let it happen. We'll take all those trials and we'll turn them into a whole bunch of blessings. Think of the millions of people that have been blessed because God let Job suffer. Because we found the instruction and the inspiration in Job's story. The same thing can be true of your story. You can take your story and be a better, more effective servant of other people than you've ever been before. Now, don't pray for the heartaches and troubles to come. Satan is going to take care of that. You don't have to ask for those. Pray that God will help you to deal with all those, and by his grace, turn the burden into a blessing. I want us to take a brief, like 2 or 3 minutes possible break, because I want to get you out of here at noon. However, I'm not going to stick with that until you promise me that you'll work with me. Just a really short break, because this next session is really, really important. It's taking all that we've talked about in these first 2 sessions and making a personal application. So go ahead and stretch, but please